Adrian woke to warmth and knew at once it was wrong. Not the fire. The cave had pockets where heat gathered unnaturally, as if something hotter than daylight breathed up through the stone. He remembered that. But this warmth had shape. A chest against his back, an arm around his middle, another man's breath stirring near his hair. For a one blurred, foolish instant, before sense returned and spoiled it, he thought Corvin. Then the arm shifted. The smell was wrong. Not salt and leather and that hard, cold steadiness Corvin carried even into foul places. This was smoke, damp cloth, singed powder, and the faint, sweet trace Diego always wore, as if vanity had its own country and he had been born there. Adrian opened his eyes. The fire had fallen to a mean knot of coals, feeding on dead cave growth and old root fiber. It breathed bitter orange light over wet black stone, over Diego's coat, over Adrian's own half-dried sleeve where it had lain too near the heat. Beyond that narrow circle, the ledge dropped back into shadow. Somewhere deeper in the cavern, water moved where he could not see it, low and constant and hateful. Diego's arm still lay around him. Adrian pulled free at once. Pain bit through his leg. His throat followed with a raw cough that scraped him from chest to mouth. He got one hand against the stone, then another, and dragged himself clear before the world decided to tilt. "There you are," Diego said softly. Adrian did not look at him first. He looked at himself. The snake bite still burned. His shoulder ached. His ribs objected to every breath. His throat felt flayed by cave water and coughing. But under all that ordinary wreckage, he felt something stranger. The old weakness was gone. Not the soreness, not the exhaustion, the other thing, the fine trembling that had haunted his hands whenever Vale's black pellet came late, the heaviness that had sat in his limbs since the voyage began. More than a day had passed. The pellet's hold should have been failing in both him and Corvin, not lifting from him like mist. Yet his fingers, splayed against the stone, were steady. That frightened him more than comfort would have. He lifted his eyes and found Diego watching him. "What's wrong?" Diego asked. Adrian ignored that and asked the only thing that mattered. "Corvin." His voice came out torn and hoarse. He swallowed and tried again. "Did you find him? He needs the pellet." Diego rolled onto one elbow. "I found you, not him." Adrian stared. "You were in a snake lair. Then the cave came apart. I had one choice near enough to take. I took you." The words might have sounded self-serving from another man. From Diego, they only sounded true. Adrian looked down at the cut cloth above the bite, then back up. "You saved me." Diego's mouth bent slightly. "Twice, if we are being generous. The snakes first, the collapse after. The fire makes 3. Adrian could not leave gratitude unspoken, even to the wrong man. "And thank you," he said, sincerely. Something warm and pleased moved through Diego's expression, small and quick, and hungrier than it should have been. "You are welcome." The silence that followed was neither easy nor hostile, only strange. The fire shifted. The cave listened. Then Adrian asked, because he could not leave it another second, "Why didn't you save Corvin?" That landed. Not as outrage. Diego was too polished for so simple a crack, but something private and ugly touched the corners of his mouth before he smoothed it away. "Because," he said mildly, "Lady Vale did not send me into the dark to rescue whichever man your heart preferred." Adrian went still. "What does that mean?" "It means the order was plain enough." Diego looked into the coals, as if the matter hardly deserved speech.
Feather first, then you, then Whitcomb, then Corvin. The words went through Adrian cleanly. Not first, not second, fourth. Diego softened his tone with practiced care. I did not make the list, I only heard it.
Adrian looked away into the dark edge of the ledge, where the light failed and stone became suggestion. Somewhere beyond that black, perhaps one shelf away or 10, Corvin was either alive or dead, and Vale had already counted the cost. It hurt more than Adrian had expected it to hear it spoken aloud. Diego watched him for a moment, then changed course with that smooth instinct of his, easing away from pain before it could turn fully against him. I searched the nest while you slept, he said. Adrian's head came around sharply, and there was no feather, no bright plume, no holy relic, nothing like the picture in your book. Burned twigs, old ash, black dust, a dead nest, and a dead lie. The image from the book rose at once in Adrian's mind. White gold, intact, beautiful enough to make a child believe relics wished to be found. Diego had shifted nearer without Adrian noticing, near enough that the fire to warm both sides of Adrian's face, near enough that gratitude had started to curdle into danger. You should not look at me as if you were my enemy, Diego said quietly. Adrian held his eyes. You work for Vale, my enemy. I came back for you. The answer stung because it was true. Diego had lifted him from the snakes. Diego had carried him out. Diego had kept him alive. Then let me be useful to you. The tone warned him before the movement did. Diego leaned in and kissed him. It was smooth, confident, almost gentle on the surface, a kiss given by a man who believed the room had already turned in his favor. Adrian pulled back at once. No, I'm sorry, no. Diego's smile thinned. You saved my life, Adrian said. That is what you felt, gratitude, nothing else. Something colder showed through Diego's face then. Not rage, vanity hurt in the wrong place. His hand went to the pistol by his coat. Not fast. That was what made Adrian go still. Diego drew the pistol and laid the barrel against Adrian's stomach. I have been very kind, he said. He bent close again, mouth brushing Adrian's jaw, the corner of it, his throat. The gun never moved. Pulled you out, carried you, kept you warm, listened to you ask for another man before you thanked the one still holding your life together. Adrian kept his breathing shallow. I was not flirting. No, Diego murmured. Then perhaps you do not understand what your face does when you are grateful. Adrian thought fast. I thought you liked girls. I saw you with Ines. That checked him for half a beat. Then Diego smiled with fresh ugliness. I flirt with Ines to annoy Ines. I want you. That is not the same thing. There it was. Not a new Diego, the same one with the polish stripped off. Adrian made himself stay soft, stay thinking. Diego, he said, as calmly as he could, you said there was no feather in the nest. Then either the book lied, or the feather must be found another way. And if Ines is alive, she is already looking. The gun stayed where it was, but Adrian had found the seam. If you waste the night on me, he said, you hand the prize to her. That landed where refusal had not. Competition flashed, hotter than lust.
The idea of Ines carrying the real prize back to Vale wounded Diego more cleanly than Adrian had. "Ines," Diego said. "Yes, you think she lives? I think she is harder to kill than most men I know." "Yes," Diego said softly, "that whore." Adrian did not let the opening close. "So, if you want Lady Vale looking at you instead of through you, you had better find it before she does."
The barrel remained against him one heartbeat longer. Then Diego eased it away. His smile returned slower now, colder for having to be rebuilt. "That's better. Be clever for me again." He rose, all grace again, though the crack Adrian had seen in him did not vanish, it only went back under glass. He shrugged into his vest, belted the pistol on properly, and crouched before Adrian. "Can you stand?" "No." "Pity. Take me to the nest." Diego smiled. "Now that sounds almost intimate." He slid one arm behind Adrian's back and another beneath his knees, then lifted him cleanly. Adrian's bitten leg flared white-hot in protest. He caught his breath against Diego's shoulder and hated himself slightly for the involuntary sound. Diego heard it and liked being needed for it. "With Ines somewhere in the cave ahead of us, now I finally have reason to hurry." Adrian grabbed the torch, and Diego carried Adrian into the dark. The black water took Corvin under before he knew whether he had shouted. One instant he had Adrian in his arms on the higher shelf. The next, stone failed, water rose, and something immense moved where nothing that large should have fit at all. Then the tentacle hit. It caught him from hip to thigh and tore him sideways off the rock. Cold black water closed over his head. For one blind second there was only pressure, dark, and the brute fact of being dragged. Then the world came back in blows. Shoulder to stone, knee to rock, his free hand skidding uselessly over the thing wrapped around him. His body was wrong. The mist pellet turned the poison mean. His grip lagged, his timing lagged. Strength reached him half a beat late. The tentacle dragged him deeper. Water hammered his face and turned his head just enough for him to see the creature below. A vast dark head, one eye too close, one side of it clouded and leaking darker water. So Diego's shot had found more than stone. Good. The current drove him and the wounded limb toward a broken line of half-submerged stalactites. One jutted up, white and jagged. Instinct said fight the pull. Corvin let it take him another yard. Then he found purchase with one boot and jammed his weight against a spur of rock. Pain went white through his leg, where the tentacle tightened. The kraken pulled again. The underside of the limb tore across the stalactite tip. The grip spasmed. Corvin ripped a broken spike free and drove it up into the softer inner seam. This time the stone found home. Black fluid clouded the water. The limb convulsed. The creature heaved sideways and drove its own torn flesh deeper against the stone. The grip broke. Corvin tore free. The current flung him across the stone lip hard enough to flash the world white. One hand found a rib of rock by chance. He hauled himself above the waterline by force. Barely. Enough. He got his torso onto the shelf and stayed there half-drowned, vomiting black water, while the channel below exploded once with the creature's pain. Then the thing withdrew deeper into the cut. Not gone, only wounded. Adrian. The name came first. He tried to rise. Dark took him first. When he woke again, someone was slapping his face. "Vane!" The voice came through water first, then stone, then clarity. "Open your damned eyes!"
Whitcomb crouched above him, bloodied and limping. Corvin came up choking on black water and pain. For one stupid instant, the cavern had no name, no direction, only heat, wet stone, and the taste of the deep still clinging to the back of his throat. Then Whitcomb's face sharpened. "Thought you're dead," Corvin managed. "Disappointed?" Whitcomb gave a short, ugly breath that might have been a laugh. "No." Corvin pushed himself up. Every part of him objected. His leg burned where the tentacle had crushed it. His chest felt caved in. His grip was unreliable. Vale's poison had found every seam in him and was quietly pulling them apart. Whitcomb was in no better shape. One side of his face was bloodied. His coat hung torn and dark at the ribs. One leg stretched badly in front of him, not useless yet, but close enough. Corvin looked past him. The chamber opened in broken shelves and black runs. The rock split into ledges, slants, and dark mouths where water moved too quietly to trust. 3 bodies lay ahead among the stone. One of Whitcomb's crew, 2 of the professors, thrown, broken, half-tangled in the ruin of the cave. No Adrian. Corvin's stomach tightened once. Whitcomb followed his gaze. "I haven't seen the Harrow boy." No comfort. Good. Corvin got one foot under himself, then the other. The chamber tilted. He waited it out by force. "We move," he said. Whitcomb rose with his sword already in hand, slow and limping. I was about to say the same. They made for the bodies, because that was where men would have landed if the water had spat them out and left them. The first body belonged to one of Whitcomb's men, neck broken, one arm folded beneath him wrong. The second was the antiquary, face slack and turned toward the stone, as if sleep had failed to become death. The third had been dragged half into a crack between rocks. Only the professor's legs showed clearly. Whitcomb stopped.
Something was moving over them. At first it looked like shadow rearranging itself in the fungus-pale gloom. Then one of the shapes lifted its head from the sailor's torn throat, and the lie was gone. The thing was about the size of a small feral cat, but built wrong for any animal he had ever seen. Long and low, black-backed and slick as varnish, it moved on too many close-set limbs, crowded thickest at the front of the body. Its forelimbs were longer than the hind ones and folded in a bat-like crouch before every leap. The pale underside was not soft belly, but ribbed, plated flesh stretched tight along the length of it, as if it had been made to crawl through cracks and come back bloodied from whatever it found there. Another hauled itself over the professor's ribs, then another. Their mouths opened in vertical splits, crowded with hooked teeth, and each first mouth, a second inner ring worked wetly, opening and closing with obscene patience as they fed. Whitcomb's sword came up. Corvin took up a broken stalactite spike from the ledge as he went, white and jagged and heavy enough to serve where a sword had not survived the water. The creatures clicked at them, a dry rattling sound like bone being tested against bone. Then they came, screeching. Whitcomb cut the first one clean across the neck seam. It split and hit the stone in 2 pieces. Both halves still writhed. Corvin drove the spike downward into the second as it launched for Whitcomb's bad leg. But another was already under his guard. It struck low and fast, hit his calf, and latched. Pain snapped white through him. Its hooked mouth fastened through cloth and leather. The inner jaws worked deeper, worrying for flesh. Corvin snarled, caught it by the back of the skull, and smashed it hard into the cave wall. The bite released. The creature dropped. Then, to Whitcomb's visible horror and Corvin's fury, it twisted at once and dragged itself back towards them. "Hard to kill," Whitcomb said through his teeth.
Another devourer came off the sailor's chest in a bat-like leap. Whitcomb knocked it aside, but two more were moving in from the dark crack behind the bodies, and another had already climbed halfway up the wall to their left. The cave was full of them.
One launched for Corvin's face. Something cracked through the air. A whip. Inez came over the brick like fury, still wet from drowning. She had lost one dagger and half the neatness of her braid, but none of the essential threat. She dropped to the ledge beside Whitcomb, snatched the pinned creature free with a twist, and kicked another off the scholar's ribs before it could jump. "You look terrible," she said. "Kind of you," Whitcomb said. Another devourer launched at her shoulder. She turned under it and drove her blade up through the pale seam beneath the jaw in one smooth, ugly motion. That was the trick then. Underjaw, pale seam. More shapes moved in from the washline, the wall, the cracks beneath the dead. Too many. Then, from somewhere beyond the broken ribs of the chamber, a pistol shot cracked through the cave. All froze. Diego, Corvin thought at once, or else someone had reached him. His whole body changed. Whitcomb pulled his sword into better grip. "Help me up!" Corvin got under Whitcomb's arm. Inez took the other side without asking. Below them, the devourers clicked and fed and watched. "Put your feet where I do, nowhere else." Then he took them into the dark. The nest did not answer gently. Diego set Adrian beside it and crouched with the impatience of a man already annoyed by disappointment. The thing was larger than the book image had promised, and uglier in every way. No beauty, no shining relic, only burned twigs, black dust, old ash worked deep into the structure, and the dead look of something once touched by great heat and long since left to itself. "There," Diego said, "still nothing." He searched again, rougher now. He tore through the branchwork, flung old ash aside, upended part of the nest with both hands, as if insult alone might force it into honesty. Adrian braced one hand against the stone and watched, breathing through the pain in his leg. "Careful." Diego laughed once without mirth. "I have been careful with everything tonight. I am tired of the experiment." He tore both hands through the lower section of the nest. Then he saw it. A faint, wrong glow under one rock at the base, half hidden by ash and branch shadow. His whole body sharpened and smiled. There. He seized the stone and lifted. The moonfire snake struck from under it and buried its fangs in the meat of his hand. Diego shouted once, more startled than pained, and jerked back hard. The snake fell away with the motion, hit the edge of the pocket, and slid among the burned twigs with a dry, furious rasp. He already had the pistol in his other hand. The shot cracked through the chamber. Ash lifted, burned twigs jumped. The snake thrashed once, twice, and went still, half buried in the nest. Diego looked at his hand. 2 punctures, blood already rising, the flesh around them darkening as if the venom had begun its work at once. He flexed the bitten hand and hissed, "Damn it!" He said it like a man angry at embarrassment, not yet afraid. Adrian stared, not at the wound, at Diego, at the speed with which his face had changed. The easy flush left it first, then the mouth tightened. Then something hotter and wronger moved under the skin, as if the body had been given bad news and was deciding how quickly to obey. Adrian felt his own pulse go hard. He had lain bitten for hours now. He had blacked out. He had seized. He had burned like fever. Yet he sat here with a clear head, steady hands, and none of the old poison weakness left in him. Diego had been bitten only seconds ago. Already his breathing had changed. The thought struck. The venom. Not cure, not miracle,
but something in it had burned against Vale's poison inside Adrian and won enough ground to change the whole field. Diego caught him looking and mistook the reason. "Do not start trembling now," he said. "It is a bite, not a death sentence." He took one step toward Adrian and nearly lost his balance. Only nearly. Another man might have hidden it. Adrian saw it. Minutes later, Diego was on one knee, then two.
"Help me," he rasped. "I don't want to die."
His lips had gone wrong. Blue had begun to gather under the eyes and mouth. Adrian dropped beside him anyway. He caught Diego's bitten hand, pressed hard above the wound, then bent and tried to draw the venom out in one desperate, useless effort to keep him in the world. It changed nothing. Diego convulsed once under his hands, and then again, hard enough to strike the stone. Then he went slack. The cave took the silence after him as if it had been waiting for its turn. Adrian stared at the body, then at his own bitten leg, then at the answer now sitting nowhere but in his head. Diego was dead. He was not. Corvin. The name arrived with such force it almost knocked him breathless. He took Diego's pistol. Then, because he needed proof in his hands, and not only in his thoughts, he shot another moonfire snake near the nest lip before it could vanish. The body writhed once and lay still. Adrian dragged Diego's knife to himself, sawed through the neck with shaking hands, and wrapped the severed head in a torn strip of his cape.
The cloth darkened at once. If the venom had stripped the poison out of him, he would drag proof of it to Corvin or die with it hidden in his coat. He knotted the bundle tight and shoved it inside. Then something under Diego's shoulder shifted. Not Diego. A wet black shape dragged itself out from beneath Diego's shoulder, slick with blood and cave filth. Another lifted its head from the collapsed nest. A third unhooked itself from a crack in the stone beside it and began to creep forward. Adrian froze. The nearest devourer raised its head. Its mouth opened in a vertical split crowded with hooked teeth, and that first ring worked wetly with obscene patience. Then it latched on to Diego's face. The bite made a thick fastening sound. More shapes came after it, climbing over Diego's ribs, forcing under his torn vest, packing themselves over him so quickly that for one sick instant Adrian could no longer tell where the body ended and the feeding began. He stumbled back on his bad leg. The nearest creature's head jerked up at once, blood striping the pale ridges beneath its mouth. It clicked once deep in its throat. Others answered from the cracks around the nest. More of them had been waiting. Adrian snatched up Diego's pistol. One devourer launched. It came not like vermin, but like a sprung trap, forelimbs spreading just enough to give the leap a false bat shape before the mouth opened. He fired. The shot blew it sideways, but the thing still writhed on the stone and dragged itself toward him. Another came low from Diego's legs. Adrian fired again. Bad hit, still moving. Too many. They poured off the corpse now in bursts, black backs flashing, pale undersides writhing, mouths wet and eager. One dropped and turned toward Adrian the instant it landed. He backed again and felt the shelf end behind his heel. Nowhere. He fired the third shot and missed. The ball sparked off rock. The pistol clicked empty in his hand. One creature fastened briefly to his boot before his kick flung it free. Another launched straight for his chest. Adrian hurled the empty pistol into it on instinct. Metal cracked against bone and mouth. The creature hit the stone sideways, shrieking, but another was already coming low for his calf. Wounding them was not enough.
He snatched at whatever lay nearest and threw it. Broken nest, twigs, dust, old ash. The handful burst across the leading devourer's face and pale underside. It stopped. Its whole body recoiled in a convulsive shudder. The two behind it checked so hard they struck into one another. One backed off with its head lowered, as if the ash itself had teeth. Adrian stared at his own hand. Grey-black dust filmed his fingers. He grabbed another handful and flung it wider. This time the reaction spread through them all. Those still feeding on Diego jerked away wherever the ash landed. The rest recoiled from it as if it were hot iron. The feather was not gone. What the fire had left behind was the feather. Fire had destroyed the form, not the power. He seized more ash with both hands and cast it in a ragged line before himself. Grey spread over the wet black stone. The devourers gathered just beyond it, crouched low and wrong, mouths opening and closing with little wet clicks, waiting for him to run out. One dropped from the lip above, aiming past the line. Adrian saw only a blur and flung the ash in his hand straight at it. The creature hit the grey in mid-drop. It shrieked, struck the stone convulsing, and fled in blind thrashing back towards the corpse, smearing ash and blood together. The others broke for one moment in all directions.
And Adrian knew with cold certainty that whatever power had burned in this nest still ruled the cave's lesser hunger. He pressed back against the stone and clutched another fist of ash. Then boots crashed beyond the chamber break, a shout, steel on stone, human voices forcing their way into the feeding dark. They found Adrian half-cornered against the wall, with ash black on his hands and the creatures drawn up in a ring beyond it. Ines came over the break first. Her whip cracked once and drove a dagger hard through the nearest devourer's pale seam throat before it could spring. Corvin hit the ledge a breath later, with Whitcomb leaning half his weight on him, both of them bloodied and wrong-footed and still moving. Adrian saw Corvin alive and changed in a way no one else there would have read correctly. "Where is the physician?" Adrian said, too fast. "Have you seen him? You look so pale, you need the pellets." Whitcomb's face hardened. "Didn't make it through the quake," he said. "Or if he did, he's lost somewhere deeper in the dark. We haven't found him."
Inez's eyes flicked once past Adrian into the dark. "Oh my God! Is that Diego?" "Alive when I left him. I don't know for how long."
Corvin stared at him a beat too long. Adrian should be worse, snake-bitten, fever broken, shaking with Vale's poison. Instead, he looked battered and white with strain, but steadier than he had any right to be. "You're standing," Corvin said, rough with surprise. "After that bite, you should barely know your own name." Adrian flicked a glance toward Ines and Whitcomb, then lowered his voice. "I know. Later." Then the devourers found the breach. Two came low for Whitcomb's bad leg. One launched for Ines's shoulder. Another dropped off the wall at Corvin's throat. Corvin stepped into a third and killed it late. Too late. Slower than he should have been. His body was finally telling the truth now, and there was no room left to lie about it. The cost. They were finished. Not in some grand way, not with speeches or last stands. Here, on wet stone, torn apart a few feet at a time, while the dark kept sending more teeth. Adrian cast ash at the left edge where one devourer tried to creep around the line. It struck the grey dust and recoiled with a dry, clicking hiss. Then shouting broke from the lower approach. Real voices, human, closer than the cave had any right to allow. Everyone turned. Torchlight struck wet stone in sudden bitter gold, flashing off mineral sheen, blades, and black blood.
For one raw heartbeat, the cavern changed shape.
The first men through came fast and disciplined, 2 teams, not one tangled rush. The Corsair led the first, both Nimshas out, veil dark against his face, eyes taking the whole ledge in one sweep. Behind him came Vale's hard men with lanterns, short pikes and boarding hooks. Whitcomb's quartermaster brought the second team a heartbeat later with 6 more men, a lantern pole, boat hooks, pistols, and a boarding axe. The quake half choked the throat, he snapped. We lost time cutting a way in. Narrow shelf, no break in the line, lanterns high, drive them through the slot. He pointed with the boat hook toward the mineral constriction between the rescue teams and the nest. His men moved before the word finished, pikes low, hooks forward, lantern pole up. Whitcomb did not waste breath. Underjaw, pale seam. The first devourers launched at the lanterns. 2 came off the wall at the nearest light-bearer in the same breath, one high, one low. The man had time for nothing but a half-raised arm. The Corsair moved through the kill before it existed. His right Nimcha opened the first throat seam. His left blade rose under the second jaw before it reached the lantern man. Both bodies struck stone, already dead. A third came from behind. He planted one boot on the carcass, vaulted just far enough to clear the snapping mouth, and killed it on the way down. He did not swing at them. He moved through where they were about to die. Whitcomb's quartermaster reached the nest lip and armed them without slowing. A cutlass thrust hilt first into Corvin's hand. A shorter hanger dropped beside Adrian. "That's what I have." Adrian caught the hanger at once. Corvin took the cutlass a beat later, slower than he should have been.
Steel gave Corvin reach again. It did not give him back what the poison had taken. The rescue and the siege met in the slot. The quartermaster's team locked the front. Pikes checked the first leap. Hooks turned the second. Short blades finished with the line exposed. Then a devourer burst from a crack at ankle height and ran straight up a pike shaft before the sailor holding it could react. By the time he dropped the weapon, it had reached his throat. The scream broke short. The quartermaster stepped over him and drove the boat hook down through the neck. "Hold!" Another landed on the dead sailor's chest from the wall. The boarding axe man split it open, failed to kill it, and Whitcomb finished it with one exact thrust while never leaving the nest lip. The line held. At the nest, the creatures tested for weakness, not numbers. One came low for Adrian's bad leg, one from the wall behind Ines, one straight through the lip at Corvin's chest. Adrian threw ash at the one coming for his leg, and it veered off shrieking. Ines's whip snapped the wall dropper sideways into her dagger. Corvin trapped the third on the stalactite point and tore it free again before it could fasten. Then he bent for one breath too long. Adrian saw it. Whitcomb saw it. Neither said his name. "Keep him standing," Whitcomb said flatly, and killed the next thing that showed him its throat. Bodies narrowed the slot. Black blood slicked the footing. Lantern smoke and cave heat turned the air thick and metallic. Then the devourers changed their thinking. They left the choke and streamed along the walls and ceiling to drop behind the line. The quartermaster caught it at once. "Lanterns up! Burn the walls! Don't let them land behind us!" The lantern pole drove high. Pikes stabbed upward. Hooks dragged bodies down. The Corsair crossed the gap in 3 gliding steps and killed 2 before they landed, then used the falling body of one as a step to cut a third loose from above a wounded sailor's face. The whole sequence took less time than a scream. The sailor died anyway. Another devourer had already come through at floor level, while every eye followed the flash above. By the time the quartermaster reached that man, his throat was open under the lantern light. That was what made the Corsair frightening. Not strength, control. Everything he did solved more than one problem.
At the nest lip, Inés found the same rhythm, her whip positioned, her dagger finished. Whitcomb fought smaller than all of them, and maybe deadlier for it. No broad cuts, no waste, only the exact inch of steel required. Corvin changed how he fought because his body gave him no kinder option. Less chase, more trap. A split of stone just outside Adrian's reach created a shallow lane that looked clean if a creature came low and fast enough. Corvin backed off it once, then again, then again. The Devourers took the invitation. Two rushed the lane together, while a third ran the wall above them. Corvin kicked a carcass into the runnel. The first leaper lost its line. Whitcomb killed the second in mid-air. Inés cracked the wall beneath the third with her whip, stealing its purchase. Corvin caught it on the stalactite spike and rammed it to stone. "Again," he said, not loudly. He had no loud left. He had timing. Another creature slipped past the right edge of the slot, choosing Adrian over the armed men. Adrian met him himself. He flung ash into its open mouth, then drove the hanger up under the jaw while it convulsed. The kill was ugly and close and human enough to shake him after. "Good," Corvin said, without looking at him. That cost Adrian more than praise should have. The Devourers began to give ground. One vanished into a wall seam, then three more through a wash line crack. A knot feeding on Diego's body slid backward into the dark with strips of meat hanging from their mouths. They kept killing while they went. On the far right, a rescue sailor looked after one retreating body instead of the one still at his feet. The one at his feet leapt and took his face. He went over the outer edge before anyone could catch him. By the time the clicking truly receded into the cracks, 5 rescue men were dead, and more were bleeding. Only then did the ledge feel like stone again, instead of a feeding place.
Whitcomb spat blood. "Did you find the feather?" Adrian looked up at the nest above them, big and round on the higher rock like a burned crown, wide enough for 2 eagles. "Yes." Whitcomb's face hardened. "Where?" Adrian raised his gray-streaked hand. "There." The quartermaster stared. "That dust?" "Phoenixes burn when they die," Adrian said. "This is what remains, not dust, ash that still holds the phoenix's power." The corsair stepped in without a word. A wounded devourer was still feeding on a corpse, its split mouth working wetly as if nothing else in the cave mattered. He bent, grabbed a handful of cave dirt and threw it over the creature's body. Nothing. The devourer only clicked and went back to feeding. The corsair looked at Adrian. "Then show me the difference." Adrian reached up to the nest, took a pinch of gray ash from the outer rim and scattered it over the devourer's back. The thing shrieked. Its whole body convulsed so hard it hit the stone. It whipped backward in blind agony, clawing away from the ash as if the stuff were fire. That was enough. Whitcomb snapped. "Case." The quartermaster was already opening his satchel. He pulled out a small brass case wrapped in waxed cloth. "Thought we'd be carrying a feather," he muttered. "We are," Adrian said, "just not the kind we expected." His eyes flicked to Diego's body. His hand found the pocket with the wrapped snakehead inside. One answer for Vale, one for Corvin. Whitcomb pointed up. "Take the core, fast." The quartermaster climbed onto the higher rock, ripped a clean square of sailcloth, and scooped the gray ash and blackened fragments from the heart of the nest into the brass case. He packed the gray ash down tight, screwed the lid shut, and handed the brass case up. The corsair caught it in his left hand without taking his eyes from the dark. He said, "That goes to Lady Vale," and turned at once for the boats, Nimcha bare in his right hand. "Move," Whitcomb snapped.
They made the boats at last, and shoved off hard from the rock. Oars bit into black water. For one breath, it felt like escape. Then something moved below. The dark water heaved and lifted the boats from underneath.